Underwater legend Valerie Taylor is a pioneer of underwater photography. She's fought to save the Great Barrier Reef since the 60s. And at a time when it was very unfashionable, she was a friend of the great white shark, I'm sure you remember that, arguing for protection of the species. At the age of 80, Valerie Taylor has returned to one of her early campaigns, the battle to protect the Coral Sea off the northeast coast of tropical Australia. Valerie is featured in a new documentary on the threat facing this body of water to our north. It's called The Last Sea Treasure, and it premieres tonight. Valerie Taylor, welcome to RN Breakfast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Fran.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio. The Coral Sea is described as one of the last places on Earth where coral reefs and ocean giants still thrive. You've been lucky enough to dive there many times over many decades. Tell us about this place.
It's a magic place. The water is crystal clear. When you slide off the boat into the water, you feel you're going to fall. There's nothing between you and the bottom. When I first went there were big fish everywhere. It has been seriously long-lined, not so much by Australians, but by Japanese and Taiwanese. But it's still a magic place. The bird life on the islands, it's just incredible. Every day of the year, the islands are covered in birds. There are only coral caves, very short vegetation, magnificent. Then the white sand drifts down into beautiful reef, which drifts down into a drop-off into paradise.
You first dived into the paradise of the Coral Sea back in 1961, I understand. How different was it then to now?
The quality of the water and the quality of the reef itself hasn't changed at all. Or well, at least not since I was last there, which was 3 years ago. But I know that the fish life has been depleted. However, there's still a lot of fish there, and there are still sharks there. Not as many as there were, but there are certainly enough. However, if it's not protected, there will be no sharks and there will be no fish.
And that is the theme, basically, of this film, this documentary, The Last Sea Treasure, which premieres tonight. It's about the threat facing the Coral Sea. But the Coral Sea is protected. It's protected in the Coral Sea Marine Reserve, isn't it?
A marine reserve, it has to be a sanctuary zone, an area where it's illegal to take anything. You can look and enjoy, not take and destroy. And the other problem, of course, with such a vast and magnificent area is policing it, is knowing who's out there and what they're doing. I mean, I have nothing against a fisherman catching a fish for dinner. Not at all. But I've seen these long lines and they're terrible. And they not only catch beautiful fish they're not going to use and sharks where they're only going to take the fins, they catch birds. They've seen birds, they drown.
It's complicated though, isn't it? It's not just up to Australia, this sea. New Caledonia, France, the French government, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, all have a stake in the Coral Sea.
But Australia has control of most of it, a great deal of it.
And a leadership role to play?
And definitely a leadership role to play. And it should be totally protected because maybe not today, but in the future, it's going to be one of the last places left in the ocean and 72% of the planet that is capable of regenerating what we're losing everywhere else because it's free of pollution.
You're listening to RN Breakfast. Our guest is Valerie Taylor, absolute underwater legend, professional diver, underwater still photographer and cinematographer. Really gave us, I think, she and her husband at the time, husband Ron, a different understanding of underwater, but also particularly the shark. Valerie, can I talk to you about sharks? Because as much as you've campaigned for coral reefs, you were an early friend of the great white. It feels like there are more shark attacks than ever before happening in our swimming beaches around Australia. Is that because there are more sharks or more people? And how do we manage this?
Fran, it's more people. And also, in the last couple of years, the school fish have been coming in very close to the shores, whereas normally they're further offshore. There are not more sharks. I'm a diver, I'm a snorkeler. 60s, 70s, early 80s, I never went into the water without seeing a shark that could be called possibly potentially dangerous. I hardly ever see them anymore, if I see them. And there's just not so many around. I have no idea, I can't explain why there are more attacks. I would say it's because there's more people going into the ocean. Sharks become attracted to anything on the surface. I'm not talking about all sharks. I'm talking about tigers and bulls and the great white.
Should we be frightened as swimmers?
Oh, heavens no, I'm not frightened. Why would you be frightened?
You're not frightened of anything. I've seen you underwater with the great whites. Can we talk about the reef? We just heard there Richard Colback talking about the reef.
Yes, we should talk about the reef.
You know what the reef used to be. You did a series with your husband again on the Barrier Reef back in 1970, I think it was. The reef is in trouble at the moment, we know, from this latest mass bleaching event. It's severely affected more than half the reef. How good a job are we doing at protecting one of the greatest natural wonders of the world, the marine world, certainly?
A very bad job indeed. And we can't do much about what is happening because we can't tell the planet what to do. We can't tell the weather what to do. We can't tell the sun not to shine. It's all part of a web of life. We have polluted a great deal of the waters of the reef, which that's our fault. And we didn't have to do that. I think mostly people didn't realise it was happening. However, there's not much we can do. We could just stand there and watch. In 1965, on the Belgian scientific expedition, we saw reefs white with bleaching. And when we had our own boat, a liveaboard boat, in the late 70s, early 80s, we went back to these reefs and you would never have known.
So that's good news.
It had regrown. It had been left alone and it had regrown.
Well, I think we can all take heart from that. Valerie Taylor, thank you again for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.
Valerie Taylor, she's a professional diver, underwater photographer and cinematographer, of course, and one of the stars of this new documentary. It's called The Last Sea Treasure, about the latest threats to the Coral Sea, and it premieres tonight in Sydney.